Hi there, Dazza at Race Centre here. We've got a little bit of a different one for you this time. It's a job that came in, so I thought it was a really good opportunity to talk you through it. Now, you will not often hear me say that there's ever a situation where making less horsepower after the job is a positive thing or a good thing, but in this particular case it is. And it's a good opportunity to talk about some fundamentals with bikes, tuning and all that sort of stuff. So a little bit of history on this job. Adrian's R6 came in because on his last couple of track days, he started just having some intermittent issues where the bike wouldn't rev properly past sort of 12,000 RPM, but it was intermittent. Sometimes it would work okay, sometimes it wasn't. So that can always be a hard one to troubleshoot because it's not consistent. So when we got the bike in, the first thing that we did was put it on the dyno to try and replicate the issue. Now, unfortunately, when we ran it up the first few times, it didn't present the issue at all. So we just went through our normal processes, investigated it a little bit further, and we found a few things. That the fuel tank in this bike was heavily corroded. So what we suggested we would do then was we actually put a donor tank on. Being an R6, we've got so many available. And when we put the donor tank on, it didn't really change that much. So it was telling us that while the tank was showing significant signs of corrosion, it wasn't hurting it so much. However, that's not something that you leave. And one of the reasons I wanted to do this video is that when it comes to tuning or performance, the underlying foundation of all of that is how mechanically sound your bike is. So, and it does happen a bit. We get bikes in where people want to tune them, and the bike mechanically underneath isn't that strong. It's worn out or it needs a major service. And then if you were to tune it based on that, you're only asking for trouble. You need to get the mechanical package underneath right first. So we thought, well, we definitely know we're going to do a tank treatment kit in it and also service the fuel pump because the fuel pump would have seen a fair bit of that corrosion. And then the other thing that we would definitely do is give the injectors a clean. So we did all that, and when we did the injector clean, we noticed there was a fair bit of contamination coming out of there, dirt and grime, and the build-up that it had seen from this fuel tank. So we did all that work. We also did a valve clearance check and adjustment on this bike because we thought, well, you know, there's so many options with it. Like as I said, the main underlying thing for this job was to make sure it was mechanically sound underneath, so that Adrian's got a bike that he can at least ride, enjoy, and it's reliable before worrying about getting extra performance out of it. So we did all that, and once we'd done all that, put it back on the dyno. First thing is that you definitely could notice the throttle was a lot nicer, and I've talked about it in other videos, but blueprinting the valve clearances makes a big difference, particularly on this Model R6. Just makes the throttle so much nicer from closed throttle to opening the throttle. So definitely notice that straight away. I'll put a link in the description to another video about valve clearances. And then what was apparent once we got it running and ran it up again, doing the same runs we did before, firstly, it felt really good, sounds amazing, but we actually lost horsepower. And the reason that we lost horsepower was because the AFR now, the air-fuel ratio, is a bit too rich. It's actually a little bit too rich. And the interesting thing about that is that previously, before we did anything, the AFR, certainly in the higher RPM at full throttle, was in a pretty good area. And now that we've fixed it, it's actually too rich, which just tells you because the fuel pump's working properly, the fuel tank's now nice and clean and has the treatment kit through it. But more importantly, those injectors are being cleaned, flushed out and working properly now. They're actually adding more fuel because they work on a duration. They open and they close on a duration. That's how it works. It doesn't, like, the fuel pressure remains constant. That's what the the fuel pressure regulator does, which is inside the fuel pump in this model. So the pressure at the rails and the injector stays the same, and then it switches on and switches off, and that's a time-based thing. So now that they're flowing properly, they're actually adding more fuel. So now would be the time to tune the bike and get rid of some of that fuel through the actual tune, which will mean that you'll get that horsepower back and then even more, and get the whole AFR line sorted out. As you can see with the graph, the AFR line hasn't really changed its shape, it's just changed where it sits because the injectors are working better now. So if you had to go on and tune the bike with the contaminated fuel tank and the injectors being dirty, then you're actually putting a tune on something that's going to keep getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And then sometimes we have people say, oh, you know, like my tune's getting bad. The tune is never going to get bad, or your ECU's not going to forget things or things like that. But what does happen is the mechanical foundation underneath changes. So it's really important to get the mechanical foundation underneath right first, so which is what we've done with Adrian here. Valve clearances, the fuel tank treatment, the fuel pump, the injectors, new spark plugs, the bike sound underneath. And then if we were to tune it, the tune's going to stay okay. Then the key is, as you're riding it long term and using your bike, doing your track days, is to keep on top of the maintenance. And maintenance isn't just oil changes. It's, you know, if you're doing a lot of track days, every year having the valve clearances checked, you know, having fuel pump serviced and all that sort of stuff. So that's probably a lot more the scenario where a situation where people think their tune's going off. It's not the tune's going off. The bike was either tuned when the mechanical foundation wasn't strong, or the mechanical foundation is starting to wear out. You need to address that. So that's what's happened in this case. So yes, we've lost horsepower on pure numbers, but if we were to tune it now, we'd get that back plus more. And then we would know that the underlying foundation we tuned the bike on is really strong. So it's a really interesting job, and thought we'd just do a little video and hope that all makes sense. Oh, other thing, we'll run this up now, and just about that, being old school, this bike doesn't have a quick shifter or an auto blip. As I've said in many videos, we do definitely recommend Translogic blippers and quick shifters. But for some of the young kids out there, you can see that even without it, you can still get really quick shifts and rev matching on the downshift. So if you don't have a quick shifter or a blipper, it's very important on the track to do rev matching on the downshift, because it makes the bike enter the corner so much better. So enjoy.